Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. And joining on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And Writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
Okay, so we have a bunch of news to talk about today, but a lot of it is stuff that came out of Comic-Con, including a lot of Marvel stuff. But we'll start first with Terminator: Dark Fate. We know that Linda Hamilton is back as Sarah Connor, but apparently her character was changed when she came on board. What do we know, Chris?
Right, so Linda Hamilton gave an interview with THR, and she was talking just, about what it was like to come back to the Terminator franchise and what it was like to play Sarah Connor again. And she actually revealed that there were certain lines. She didn't say what those lines were, but she said there were certain lines in the script that she just flat out refused to say. And her reasoning was they didn't seem true to the character of Sarah Connor as she knows her. And she says that director Tim Miller was telling her, those lines existed to make Sarah Connor more quote unquote relatable. And Linda Hamilton was saying, well, Sarah Connor shouldn't be relatable. Does that mean you want to try and make her softer because she shouldn't be a softer, even likable character? I mean, if you remember Sarah Connor from Terminator 2, she's not really, a likable character. She's kind of like a jerk in that movie, and that's sort of what makes her so memorable. And, Linda Hamilton was not about to let them change that character. So she stood her ground and made sure Sarah Connor is not soft in the new Terminator. So at least we have that to look forward to.
Does this make you worry at all about the approach for this new Terminator film?
Yes, it does. I hope it turns out okay. I'll see it. I like that Linda Hamilton is back, but I'm just not a big Tim Miller fan. And I also think pretty much every Terminator sequel except Terminator 2 has been either bad or even just like terrible. So they don't have a good track record, but we'll see.
What did Linda Hamilton say about the director, Tim Miller?
She really didn't have...
It was like a coded phrase, right? Like it was like one of those things where you read between the line and it didn't seem like she had much faith in him.
Yeah, basically during the interview, they asked her what it was like working with Tim Miller, and I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but she said basically, well, this was who Jim Cameron suggested, so I went with it. So it basically... Without saying like he's not that great, she was saying like he was the director and I did my job. But if you read between the lines, it really sounds like she wasn't incredibly impressed with Mr. Tim Miller. But I could be interpreting it wrong. Who knows?
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. I'm not impressed by this trailer that's out for Terminator: Dark Fate. I'll put that in the show notes. So if you didn't see it during Comic-Con, you can check that out. But let's move on to Marvel. Let's talk about Thor, or female Thor, Lady Thor. Ben, what are we going to call Natalie Portman in Thor: Love and Thunder?
Well, according to Taika Waititi, who's directing Thor: Love and Thunder, Natalie Portman's character is going to be referred to as Mighty Thor. Somebody on Twitter sarcastically said, it's completely normal and makes sense that when Thor is a man, he is called Thor, and when Thor is a woman, she is female Thor. And Taika Waititi responded, correction, she's called Mighty Thor. So, yeah, that's, I guess, our first sort of hint at how they're going to be distinguishing Natalie Portman's character's name. In the comics, she's just referred to as Thor. So this Mighty Thor thing is actually the comic run, like the title of the comic run. So that's where they're taking that from. And in the comics, Thor becomes unworthy and his name changes from Thor just to Odin's son. And so she literally becomes Thor. And in the comics, there's only one worthy person at one time. And we've seen that this is a little bit of a different approach than what they've done in the MCU, because as Avengers Endgame showed, Thor and Captain America could both they were both worthy. They could both wield Mjolnir at the same time. So, yeah, I'm not entirely sure what else to say here other than she's going to be called.
I will say this, as we are a group of people that write about film for a living. I'm glad that they gave her a name other than Thor, because it was really confusing to write about.
Yeah, exactly.
So, anyways, we'll get back to Thor in a little bit, but let's talk about Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which, by the way, if you look at this chart, this timeline that they've released at San Diego Comic-Con and Hall H, Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is only a year and a half long. That's probably the shortest phase yet, right? By far, it's the shortest phase yet, which makes me wonder, what is Phase 5? Brad, what do we know?
Well, we know that, at least for now, Phase 4 isn't ending with some kind of big crossover movie like the previous phases that all had Avengers movies to sort of put a cap on them, even though the most recent phase had Spider-Man Far From Home come afterwards, and then there was an Ant-Man movie that was after one of the other Avengers movies as well. So with Phase 5, we're expecting there will probably be some kind of big crossover event, but at the same time, Kevin Feige isn't saying whether or not that's true, but he did confirm that Phase 5 is already planned as part of the 5-year plan overall that Marvel has already figured out. They were even talking about that before the Comic-Con panel took place this past weekend. And Feige actually, in an interview with MTV, said, quote, "We debated what we should announce at Comic-Con. Should we announce 4 and 5? We've planned them out. We've got 5 years down the road." And I was like, I think 11 projects in 2 years is plenty, having not mentioned anything for 2 or 3 years. So it sounds like they could have announced Phase 5 if they wanted to, but they decided to keep it a little bit more low key and only do the Phase 4, which takes us up through 2021. And I think that's good enough, especially since, like he said, that's 11 projects. And if anything, this kind of allows a little bit more room for speculation as to how all these movies will add up to whatever the next big crossover is. We know that what at least some of these movies probably will be, because there was that quick mention at the end of the panel where he talked about Black Panther 2, Captain Marvel 2, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, X-Men, Fantastic Four, and, of course, the Blade announcement. So there's a chance that all of those movies and more could be part of Phase 5, and that will lead up to a new Avengers movie at the end of Phase 5. And when I say new Avengers, I literally mean the title New Avengers, because that's a comic run in Marvel Comics where there's an entirely different team from the original team that we know. But considering what Marvel is doing with some of these original Avengers characters, there's a chance that we'll still see different versions of some of those characters, because we have Sam Wilson, who's the new Captain America. As we just talked about, we have Natalie Portman, who's going to be a mighty Thor. And it seems like we might just be building up a new roster of Avengers that will take the place of some of the characters who are no longer part of the team.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering, I know they've kind of hinted at that there's going to be a female Avengers team of some kind. I'm wondering if that's going to be its own thing. Is that going to be the new Avengers? Are they setting Natalie Portman's Mighty Thor up to be part of that team up?
I think that's certainly possible. And then to even expand that roster even more, I would almost be willing to wager that the Black Widow movie that's coming up will open up the gate for Florence Pugh to become the new Black Widow, which is something that happens in the comics as well. After Natasha Romanoff is no longer Black Widow, there's another character that steps up to take on the mantle. So that would make perfect sense to me if they're actually going to do a full-on female team-up movie.
I know some people listening to this their eyes are glazing over because we've been talking about Marvel so much lately. I apologize, but this happened after Comic-Con and after a Marvel release date. When Feige does all that press. But we have a little bit more to talk about. Let's talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Because this was something that wasn't mentioned in Hall H at the Marvel panel. And James Gunn said, it is still coming. It's just he's working on Suicide Squad first. But how does this affect Thor, Love, and Thunder? What do we know, Ben?
Yeah, so somebody on Instagram asked James Gunn, is Thor Love and Thunder before or after Guardians of the Galaxy 3? And James Gunn responded, before. So, I mean, I guess you could look at that, assuming that he is answering like chronologically in terms of like the actual movies. Like Thor Love and Thunder is dated to come out in 2021, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 does not have a release date yet. It's going to be after that because it's presumably part of Phase 5. But we are choosing to believe, and we actually reached out to James Gunn about this, and we haven't heard back, but we're choosing to believe that he's referring to the time period in which these movies are set. So Thor, Love, and Thunder takes place before the events of Guardians of the Galaxy 3. So, I don't know, there's some interesting implications there. I sort of broke it down in an article at slashfilm.com, which you can link and read in the show notes. So if you want to read about the specific possibilities of what that could mean for the character and these different movies, you can do that there. But
what does it mean, Ben? Because, well, first of all, let's acknowledge the other possibility. The other possibility is Thor, Love and Thunder takes place, 3 years in the future, and then Guardians Volume 3 will be a prequel to that. That seems confusing. Like, that doesn't seem like something they're going to do.
Right, yeah, I agree. I think that seems maybe a little bit unnecessarily confusing for Marvel because those characters are still alive. We talked about this off mic earlier, but the Black Widow movie takes place before Avengers Endgame and stuff, like right after Captain America Civil War, but at least audiences in that case know that Black Widow died in Avengers Endgame, so they don't really have to wonder about why the events of the Black Widow movie are not coming at the end of her linear story. And if Thor and the Guardians are still alive at the end of Love and Thunder, then yeah, for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 to come after that but be set before it, it would require some explanation. Yeah. And filling in the gaps that I'm not entirely sure that Marvel wants to do. So let's assume that Love and Thunder is actually set before Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. It just makes me wonder whether Taika Waititi, who's directing Love and Thunder, is going to basically pick up the story right after what we saw at the events of Avengers Endgame with Thor teamed up with the Guardians, or if he's just going to skip a little bit forward in the timeline and make this like a Mighty Thor story, because
I think you have to pick up with him with the Guardians. Like, I know we all assumed that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was going to be Thor with Guardians of the Galaxy, but maybe this film, in the beginning of this film, it explains why Thor isn't there, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 will actually be a proper conclusion to that Guardians storyline after all.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally possible. It would just be interesting if that happens, because the Guardians have only appeared in Avengers movies that have not been directed by, when you're talking about movies that haven't been directed by James Gunn. So this would be the first sort of, regular hero solo film that they would show up in. And James Gunn has such a specific voice for those characters and a specific take on them that it would be interesting for them to certainly stick around for the entirety of that movie. And I think Brad suggested in our Slack earlier that maybe they just, Thor and the Guardians are teamed up for like the first act of Love and Thunder before Thor eventually sort of moves on to become, to take on the responsibilities of dealing with whatever this actual film's story is going to be, which sounds plausible. But to me, it could really go either way here.
Yeah, I mean, James Gunn did advise the Russo brothers with the Guardians and the Avengers films. So
it's also interesting to know too that his Guardians 3 script was written before, it's been completed for a long time, and he didn't actually have anything to do with Thor meeting up with the Guardians like at the end of Endgame. So you would think if those characters were together at the beginning of Volume 3, then that would have been a natural point for them to go in Endgame, but that's not the case. It seemed like they sort of like did their own thing in Endgame. So
that makes me almost believe that I am right, that Thor Love and Thunder is going to explain how they aren't together by the start of Volume 3. But I don't know. We'll have to see. Speaking of Volume 3s, Kill Bill Volume 3, is it something we'll ever get to see, Chris?
No. I really don't think it's going to happen. Quentin Tarantino, he's out there doing press for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and as is usually the case when he does press, people ask him about all his other movies. And Kill Bill came up, and he's been talking on and off again about a potential Kill Bill almost since the first two movies came out. There's that scene where Uma Thurman and Vivica A. Fox get into a fight, and Uma Thurman kills Vivica A. Fox in front of her daughter. And she says, if you're still angry about this in whatever years, come see me. And he's always said like that was sort of like a setup for some sort of future sequel where Vivica A. Fox's daughter is older now, and she goes after the bride, and so on and so forth. So he's been talking off and on about that for a few years now. And while appearing on a podcast, he actually revealed that he and Uma Thurman were just last week talking about Kill Bill 3. At the same time, he says, there's no real plans for it. There's not, it's not a definite thing. Basically, what he boils it down to is if he is ever going to make a sequel, that would be the one he would make. But at the same time, he's been talking about his retirement all year and, maybe making his last movie a Star Trek movie. So I would not hold my breath about this happening, but it's worth pointing out that he and Uma Thurman still talk about it from time to time.
It seems ridiculous to me that he's saying that he probably has only one more film left in him, and he's talking about Star Trek movies and Kill Bill Volume 3. I know you're a huge Tarantino fan. What would you rather see him do for his final film? Like either of those films or another original?
I mean, I would prefer something completely original myself, but I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I mean, I'll put it this way. I'll be happy probably with whatever he does just because, I like his films. But if I had to pick, I would rather him do at least one more fully original movie.
I feel like Kill Bill Volume 3 is something he could produce and not have to direct. I don't need to see him direct that. But I am very morbidly curious about what a Tarantino Star Trek movie would even look like or feel like. Although, I'm not sure I want him to end his career on a Star Trek movie. Ben, do you have any thoughts on this?
Man, yeah, this is a tough one. I think I also, like Chris, would prefer something original just because he's like one of the guys right now, with the way that the Hollywood landscape is working and the studio system and all of that. We've spent so much time on this podcast alone talking about Marvel. Tarantino is one of the few people who can actually get pretty decent sized budgets for totally original ideas. And I would hate to see him waste, quote unquote, one of his 10 spots on something that, theoretically somebody else might be able to make. I would just love to see him embrace fully another like full on Tarantino project and then ride off into the sunset if that's what he chooses to do.
I'm betting this all rests on how well Once Upon a Time in Hollywood does at the box office. Because if it's another Hateful Eight, I could totally see him doing a Kill Bill or Star Trek. But if it's a huge success, like a more of a Inglourious Basterds like success, I could totally see him doing like one final original film.
You think he cares about that, or do you think that are you just talking about like financing? Like,
I think it's financing. I think this is his I know he went around the town and he, could have sold this film anywhere, but I think if you have two of Hateful Eights in a row, he's not gonna be able to do that for the next film.
But theoretically, like his last movie would be Quentin Tarantino's last film, and that pretty much markets itself. So like,
yeah, you're right.
I don't know.
Good point. Okay. Let's get back to Marvel really quick and let's talk about Blade. This is something they dropped at the end of the Marvel Studios panel. They dropped that they're doing a Blade reboot. And honestly, after the excitement died down, the first thing I thought of is how pissed is Wesley Snipes right now? So Brad, what does Wesley Snipes think of this Blade reboot?
It turns out that he's not nearly as pissed as a lot of people thought. In fact, it seems like a lot of Blade fans are actually more pissed off than he is because comicbook.com got Wesley Snipes to give them an exclusive statement commenting on the recent Blade news. And it appears he's been paying attention on social media as to what the outrage and reaction to a new Blade because he started his statement by saying, "To all the daywalkers losing their minds right now, chillax. Although the news comes as a surprise, it's all good. Such as the business of entertainment. Much peace to the MCU crew, always a fan. Honor and respect to the Grandmaster Stan Lee, obviously. Congratulations and salam to Mahershala Ali, a beautiful and talented artist whose expressions I look forward to experiencing for many years to come. Inshallah, we will someday work together. Most importantly, to my loyal fans, the incredible outpouring of love is overwhelming. I am grateful for the never-ending support. So nah fret, nah worry. It's not the end of the story. Welcome to the Daywalker Clique. So a pretty level-headed response from Wesley Snipes, all things considered.
Yeah, I would expect something very different from Wesley Snipes. I mean, hasn't he been like petitioning Kevin Feige to do another Blade film and stuff like that? Like,
yeah, he's wanted to for a while. So,
and he says it came as a surprise to him. He said that in that statement. So that doesn't lead me to believe that he's like signed to be part of this in some way.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah. Do you think he's so level-headed because he secretly knew about it and has like a cameo role or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still possible, even if he says that, because obviously it's something he wouldn't want to spoil, and the whole idea would be of having it be a surprise of him appearing in the movie somehow would be a cool thing. But yeah, I mean, it's the outrage from fans about a new Blade is kind of mystifying to me, because sure, you can love Wesley Snipes as the original Blade, but still understand that this is how movies work. But there are people who are saying, like, he should still be Blade. And it's like, haven't you heard all the stories about how difficult it was to work with him on Blade Trinity? Like, Patton Oswalt has told a bunch of stories of what it was like with Wesley Snipes on that movie. There was even a scene where he refused to open his eyes like he was supposed to, waking up on a morgue table, and they had to add computer-generated eyes opening on his face in order to make the scene work. So, like, that's not something Marvel wants to work with, no matter how much Wesley Snipes would want to do that. And so, yes, Wesley Snipes, a great martial artist, a fantastic Blade. But, like, I'm sorry, like, it's time to move on.
But the person you described there, Brad, a person that seems so unreasonable, not wanting to even open their eyes in a take of a, millions of dollars film production, does not seem like the person that would release this statement. I think I'm on Ben's wavelength here, that I think he's involved in some way, even though he says it came as a surprise.
Or maybe he's just trying to take the high road and just be cool about it because he doesn't want to be that guy.
Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. A part of me does think he has a cameo and he's faking it, but I really don't know. At the same time, like Brad said, he does have that reputation for being kind of a jerk, and maybe he's trying to play it safe, and he's thinking, if I act cool now, they will offer me a cameo. Maybe that's what he's doing. He's hedging his bets.
That's possible as well. Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find the stories we talked about on today's podcast linked in the show notes. This podcast is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please rate and read this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends. Spread the word. And we'll see you tomorrow.